Hello everyone, and welcome back to Bitwig Studio and Music Production. This is lesson 3.53, and in this lesson we're going to take a look at the Dynamics device that comes bundled with Bitwig Studio. Now that we're familiar with the compressor, the Dynamics device should be very easy for us to cover. It's basically a compressor on steroids. Now, that doesn't mean that you should only use the Dynamics device, because in all actuality, these do sound a little bit different. Whatever the coding they use for the compressor as compared to the Dynamics device, there are some subtle nuances and subtle differences. And so there really is no telling what you're going to prefer at any one time. Now, as you get more advanced and as you continue to use the compressor and the Dynamics device over and over again, you might start to find that to your ear, the compressor sounds better on bass instruments, while with the Dynamics, you can really get something good with vocals or with a drum loop, etc., etc., etc. But again, it's all going to be up to your own experimentation. And if you're just starting out, there really are no wrong answers. And even knowing what you prefer can oftentimes take a really, really long time. But let's take a look at the Dynamics device here. And what we're going to see is some very familiar settings. We have a threshold, a ratio, an output, an attack, and release. So we should feel pretty comfortable. Not only that, but we also have some visual displays for us. And this little visual graph is going to actually let us see just how much compressing we're doing and even when our signal is breaching the threshold. So let's just jump into it. Let's put our attack down to 0, our release all the way up. For right now, we'll leave this in peak mode, and let's take a look at how this Dynamics device is divided. We have a loud section and a quiet section. For right now, let's focus on the loud section. And with the loud section, if we turn the ratio forward, we're getting compression. If we pull it back, we're getting what's referred to, I think, as like reverse compression or inverse compression. I don't really know what the technical term is, but trust me, you'll definitely hear it when we start to mess around. But for now, let's just play back our drum loop and let's add a little bit of subtle compression. So maybe we'll put our ratio to 3:1, maybe 4:1, who cares? Let's start playing this back. And of course, our release setting is really going crazy. Hopefully you guys can see this, but there's a little white dot, and that's indicating where our signal is in relation to our graph. And really, this mark here, this mark in the center, that's pretty cool. I didn't know you could actually change things. You can actually drag and change your settings here, which is pretty cool. But this little white circle is indicating where we are in relation to our settings we put in here. So let's start to pull this release down and watch that little white dot. It's going to start to slide just ever so slightly. If we get down far enough, we'll actually be able to see, like I like when I'm using a compressor, that our gain reduction isn't constantly going and our little line is now jumping. If we increase the attack, we'll get a little more punch. And of course, we can increase the output as well. Try to match our levels. And the compressed. So you can just hear that little extra punch there. Now, what does this knee parameter do? Well, if we watch the graph, you'll see exactly what it does. It basically smooths out our point of compression. If my knee is all the way down to 0, we have a really sharp and a really steep point of threshold of once we cross, we've crossed. The knee kind of smooths that out a little bit. It makes it so that it's not quite so specific to our settings. And if I really increase this, you're going to see it looks like a pretty nice little curve. And so now when I play this back, I want you guys to see the difference with the gain reduction first, and then I'll tell you what to listen for. All right, so I'm just going to pop the knee all the way up. Okay, I haven't changed the attack and release settings. And now when I pull the knee all the way down, just take a look at the difference in speed, and you can even hear the difference. Now, in the case of something like a drum beat, where we still want to try to maintain some of those transients and still get that punch, a really soft knee setting probably isn't the way to go. But compare that with like a vocalist where you don't want people necessarily knowing that any compression is occurring and you're just trying to bring up the overall average level. A softer knee is sometimes a really great option for that. And even with a drum loop or with anything, sometimes softening that out just a little bit can give you something that sounds a little bit more transparent. Also typically means we can lower the release setting just a little bit. All right, very cool. Something similar to the knee setting is actually the peak and RMS models of this dynamics processor. When we're in peak, you're going to hear that the compressor is really looking for those transients, and it's looking to act upon those transients. When we switch to RMS, we're talking about the average signal level. And if we just listen to this difference here, you're going to pick up immediately what I'm talking about. So right now, listen to those transients, listen to the hit on the kick and on the snare. Now listen as I switch to RMS. Start to lose some of that power. And again, when are we going to want to use RMS versus peak? Really, it depends. It's up to you. Again, with something like a drum loop with these really sharp defined transients, sticking in peak mode is oftentimes the way to go. But when you're working with maybe a vocalist, again, you want it to be more transparent. You want to just really bring up the average level overall. RMS is the way to go, because when you start using RMS, the transients are going to be starting to pull down a little bit more, and you can bring up the overall output level. And again, these dynamics controllers are all about attempting to control the actual dynamic range. Now with the compressor, we really only had one option, and that was to turn things down. Our ratio can only go into the positives, right? Now, with the dynamics control, we actually have the ability to do the opposite. And I can take my ratio control and I can start to push it into negatives. Okay, and as I pull this to the left, it's going to do exactly what you think. It's actually going to make those peaks louder. Okay, so we have to be a little bit careful. I'm going to put my output back to 0, and we're just going to mess around with this, and you're going to hear exactly what I'm talking about. I'll start with the ratio in this positive mode to the right, and then I'll start to swing it back to the left. Again, listen for those transients. You can even see now our gain's pushing up, so I might have to turn this down a little bit. And now it's interesting, because if we turn the attack control up, we're actually losing that punch. So now we're just really adding some extra punch and kick to the transient itself, and we're actually increasing level as compared to decreasing it. And we can go a little crazy. You can see we're going the reds there, so let's turn this down. And now listen to the difference. Now, personally, I don't really like that sound, but it's something interesting. It's something different. This isn't the way people normally process drums. And just because people don't normally process drums this way, this is exactly what you should be looking to do, or looking to find some kind of application for this. So let's move into the quiet section now. And this is now going to be working as an expander as compared to a compressor. What does an expander do? Well, it actually listens for the quieter parts and will make them quieter. So by making the quiet parts quieter, you're actually increasing the dynamic range. And so what we're going to do is we'll play this drum loop back, and we'll try to hone in on the hi-hats and actually try to turn them down a little bit in relation to the rest of the drum loop. This is a good example of when you turn things down too much with the release, you start to get these really nasty artifacts. You can hear how clear the hi-hat sounds without this on, and then with it on, it's a little bit crazy. It's really frustrating. We have that cymbal hit, so we have to try to compensate for that. Might be one way to do it. Okay, and if we want to go to some more extremes, we can do some really crazy things here as well. And again, here's what we started with. And then last but not least, we can actually pull this ratio out into the positive. And so now what we're doing is like upward style compression, reverse style expansion. I don't really know if there are proper technical terms for these applications, but really it's all about the sound. And once we have this visual reference for us, we know what's happening. In this case, we're actually pulling up the lower parts in a signal. And this is something kind of different. I very rarely see processors that give you the ability to do this. And this is a really unique way of approaching compression because in a way, I mean, expansion, I should say, because what we're doing here is we're taking those lower parts in the signal where it's looking for these softer areas and it's going to bring those up. And this actually can give you some really cool effects, especially with a drum loop like this. So let's go ahead and mess around with that, see what we can come up with. Oh, idiot. Gotta turn the release down. There we go. That's sounding cool. Turn that up. You can hear the resonance from the cymbal just lingers on in this case. It's really, really cool effect. Go RMS if we want. So just unlimited amount of creative possibility within this dynamics effect. And last but not least, we have our little side chain as well. And if you watch the video on the side chain with the gate, it works, you know, pretty much exactly the same way. And I can just give you a quick example. The unique thing is we can actually work the side chain though, even when we're working in you know, these reverse modes, which is really, really crazy, even when we're doing this upward style compression. Okay, so I finally got that reverb sounding good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger the drum loop from the time and duration channel. I'm going to add a dynamics after the reverb. And now I'm going to set the side chain to trigger from, let's do this snare, which I think I have set up to play on the 1. Cool. So let's see what I can do with this. So this dynamics, once I put it into sidechain, is now taking advantage of this time and duration. That's what it's using for its input. So we'll do post fader first. Let's do something crazy so you can really hear it. And this is where the release control becomes really important. Actually speed this up if we want. And now remember, if we set this to pre-fader, we're now starting to get that sort of pumping effect that we've all heard in dance music so many times. A little bit of knee is going to make it not so glitchy. There we go. So you can come up with as many sort of creative variations on that as you want. Of course, if you want to get crazy, you can then start to use the expander as compared to using the compressor. This is going to get out of control pretty quickly because it's now actually having the opposite effect. It's turning it up. So what it's doing here is it's actually turning up the level of the chord channel when the snare is hitting. Okay, sorry about having to stop the video. There was like this massive glitch that occurred when I turned off the compressor and everything. But anyway, those are a few uses of the sidechain application within the dynamics device here. Where it's really going to start to get crazy is when we get into using this effects section here within the sidechain. And you're going to hear all about that in a couple of lessons when we start talking about some of the more advanced and unique features of the devices. But for now, that should give you plenty to mess around with and experiment with. Thank you so much for watching, and you'll hear from me again in the next lesson. Take care.